The silence was wrong. Fleet Commander Torvald Dreth had served aboard Vrashari warships for 41 years, and in that time he had learned to read silence the way younger officers read sensor feeds. There was the silence of empty space, which hummed with the background radiation of dying stars and carried in it nothing worth fearing. There was the silence of a fleet at rest, engines idled, crews cycling through third watch, the ship breathing in its own mechanical rhythms. And there was this silence, the silence of a gap where something should be, a frequency that had stopped broadcasting, a signal that had gone dark at the precise moment it should have flared. The Vrashari 3rd Expeditionary Fleet held position along the Aranth Corridor, 1,400 warships arrayed in a crescent formation that spanned 200,000 kilometers of contested space. It was, by any reasonable measure, the most formidable concentration of naval power the Vrashari conquered had assembled in a generation. 6 dreadnoughts anchored the formation's spine, each one a fortress of layered composite armor and particle lance batteries that could slag a moon from 3 light seconds out. 48 heavy cruisers filled the middle ranks. 312 destroyers prowled the flanks in hunter packs of 6, their sensor arrays sweeping the void in overlapping cones that left no blind spots. The remainder, frigates, corvettes, electronic warfare platforms, and the fleet tender ships that kept the whole apparatus fed and fueled, filled the spaces between like mortar between stones. Torvald stood on the command bridge of the Eternal Mandate, the fleet's flagship dreadnought, and he watched the tactical display paint its picture of controlled dominion. Every icon was accounted for. Every ship was at its assigned station. Every sensor array was broadcasting nominal. The display told him that his fleet owned this corridor from the Aranth Beacon to the Veloron dust shelf, a volume of space roughly 9 billion cubic kilometers, and that nothing moved within it without his knowledge. The display was lying. He felt it in the base of his skull, where 4 decades of instinct had carved grooves that no amount of rational analysis could smooth over. Something was wrong with the picture. Not with the data was clean, verified by 3 independent sensor nets and cross-referenced against the fleet's gravitational mapping array. The problem was the data itself. It was too clean, too complete, too perfectly nominal. In 41 years, Torvald had never once seen a sensor sweep return all nominal across 1,400 ships and 9 billion cubic kilometers. Space was messy. It was full of rogue asteroids and solar wind pockets and magnetic eddies, and the occasional ion storm that threw false readings across half the spectrum. A sensor sweep should return a handful of anomalies, ghosts that needed chasing, readings that needed clarifying, signatures that turned out to be cosmic noise. That was normal. That was healthy. This sweep was pristine. Every frequency, every band, every detector mode, all reporting nothing but the fleet and the empty void around it. Sensor officer. Torvald's voice carried the weight of a man who did not raise it because raising it would have implied he was uncertain, and Torvald did not permit uncertainty on his bridge. Run the sweep again. Full spectrum, active ping, maximum resolution. The sensor officer, a young male named Dallon who had earned his station through examination scores rather than combat time, glanced up from his console. His secondary eyes, the smaller pair set above the primary ones, blinked in the pattern that indicated mild confusion. Commander, the sweep completed 40 seconds ago. All bands nominal. I'm aware of what it reported. Run it again. Dallon ran it again. The results came back in 31 seconds, all nominal. Torvald stared at the display, and the display stared back with its 1,400 green icons and its 9 billion cubic kilometers of nothing. He turned to his executive officer, Fleet Captain Orath Sen, who stood at the tactical station with the rigid posture of a man who had been waiting for this conversation. "Something is bothering you," Sen said. "The sweep is clean." "Yes. Too clean." Sen's primary eyes narrowed, the Vrashari expression that could mean agreement, concern, or the recognition that a superior officer was about to order something expensive. You believe we have company. I believe that a perfectly nominal sweep across this volume of space is itself an anomaly. Torvald moved to the display and placed one hand against its surface, as if touching the data would let him feel what the sensors couldn't detect. The humans have been quiet for 7 months, since the Strait incident, since we burned their listening post, and they sent their formal protest through the Concord's diplomatic channels. 7 months of silence. 7 months of nothing. The diplomatic channels are still active. Their ambassador is performing the role of an ambassador. He sits in the Concord chamber and issues measured statements about proportional responses and the importance of established boundaries. He is doing exactly what an ambassador is supposed to do while something else happens somewhere else. Torvald's hand pressed harder against the display. The humans do not go quiet for 7 months without reason. When they talk, they are being polite. When they stop talking, they are being something else. Sen was quiet for a moment. Around them, the bridge hummed with the low-frequency vibration of the Eternal Mandate's reactor, a deep, bone-level thrum that every Vrashari officer learned to stop hearing after their first week aboard. The bridge was a half-dome of layered crystal and dark composite, designed to give the fleet commander a panoramic view of the tactical display that wrapped around the forward third of the space. 17 officers manned stations in a tiered arrangement that descended from Torvald's position at the apex, like the seating of an amphitheater. Each station was a pool of blue-white light, and each officer's face was lit from below by the glow of their console, giving the bridge the quality of a chapel where the congregation prayed to censor data. If the humans were going to respond to the Strait incident with force, Sen said carefully, they would have done so within the standard response window. Military doctrine across every spacefaring species in the cataloged sectors follows the same basic logic. A provocation is answered within days or weeks, or it is absorbed into the diplomatic process and addressed through negotiation. It has been 7 months. The window has closed. That is the logic of every spacefaring species in the cataloged sectors, Torvald agreed. The humans are not every spacefaring species. He turned from the display and walked to the intelligence station, where Subcommander Resk maintained the fleet's threat assessment database, a constantly updated library of every known military capability of every species the Vrashari Concord had encountered in its 600 years of expansion. Resk was older than most of the bridge crew, a scarred veteran of the Peloran campaign who had lost his left hand to a plasma burn and replaced it with a prosthetic that clicked against the console keys with a sound like teeth on glass. Resk, pull the human file. Everything we have on their naval doctrine, their response timelines, their force disposition as of the most recent intelligence update. Resk's prosthetic hand clicked across the keys and the data filled his console, and then by relay the main display. Torvald watched it scroll. The file was thick. The Vrashari Concord's intelligence service had been cataloging human military capabilities for 37 years, since the first contact between a Vrashari survey ship and a human patrol cruiser at the edge of the Veloran dust shelf. In those 37 years, the file had grown from a single-page contact report to a document of over 4,000 entries, and every entry carried the same quiet annotation in the assessment column: inconclusive. Not because the intelligence was bad. The Vrashari were meticulous collectors of data. Their intelligence on the humans was exhaustive. Tonnage, armament, crew complement, shipyard locations, fleet bases, supply depots, training pipelines, officer rotations, the entire logistics chain that kept the Terran combined fleet operational across 11 sectors. What they did not know was the boundary. Every species the Vrashari had encountered in 600 years had one: economic, technological, biological. The Ithrani had hit a biological wall. Their crews could serve only so many hours before their physiology collapsed. Every species had a ceiling, and finding that ceiling was the key to defeating them. The human file had no boundary. Not because the humans were infinite, Torvald was not a fool, but they had a quality that made their boundary invisible. They held back. It was there in the data, if you knew how to read the pattern. Every encounter between Vrashari and human forces had followed the same shape. The humans deployed less than what the Vrashari knew they possessed. At the Valoran incident, 8 years ago, the humans had responded to a border incursion with 4 cruisers and 11 destroyers. The Vrashari had catalogued 67 cruisers and 209 destroyers in the sector. The humans had used less than 7% of their available force. At the Peloran Theater, where the Conquered had pushed through a disputed system and displaced a human mining colony, the humans had responded with a single carrier group, 44 ships against the Conquered's 230. The carrier group had fought a textbook rearguard action, inflicted asymmetric losses on the Conquered's vanguard, and withdrawn to the next system in good order. They had never committed more than what the situation demanded. They had never shown the full strength of what they had. The intelligence analysts called it proportional response doctrine. Torvald called it something else. He called it restraint. It was the single most dangerous word in his professional vocabulary. He had tried to explain this to the War Council 3 years ago in a briefing that earned him a formal reprimand. He had drawn a simple diagram, measured capability, theoretical maximum, and the gap between them. For every other species, that gap was narrow, 5%, 10, perhaps 20, manageable, knowable. For the humans, the gap had no upper bound. They kept deploying the minimum necessary and withdrawing before anyone could observe the maximum. Every response was a measured fraction of a whole nobody had ever seen. The Supreme Commander had called his analysis strategically pessimistic. Torvald had returned to his flagship and added 3 words to his personal log: "They are wrong." And restraint, in his experience, was not the same thing as limitation. A species that could not fight harder was limited. A species that chose not to fight harder was something far more dangerous, because the distance between what they showed and what they possessed was unmeasured. And unmeasured capability was the definition of a threat you could not plan for. The Rathan Strait incident had tested that restraint. 7 months ago, a Vrashari strike force, operating under orders from the Conquered's War Council, with Torvald's reluctant endorsement, had destroyed a human signals intelligence post on the edge of the Rathan Strait, a narrow channel of navigable space between 2 dense nebulae that both powers claimed. The post had been lightly defended, a single frigate and a handful of sensor drones. The strike force had overwhelmed it in under 4 minutes. 11 human crew members had died. Torvald had opposed the operation. The War Council had overruled him. The humans were predictable, they said, restrained, manageable. Torvald had signed the order because refusing would have placed the fleet under a commander who would not have lost a single hour of sleep over 11 dead humans. He carried those 11 deaths with cold professionalism and the private knowledge that neither wrong thing for the right reason, nor right thing for the wrong reason, made the names any less dead. The humans had protested through diplomatic channels, words like unacceptable and gravely concerned. Their fleet had not moved. Their shipyards had not changed production tempo. 7 months of exactly what the War Council had predicted. Except the model was built on data the humans had provided, and they had been choosing what data to provide for 37 years. The War Council had called it a victory. Torvald had said one thing in the council chamber: when a predator is quiet, it is not because it is afraid. It is because it is hunting. They had dismissed his concern and deployed the fleet, 1,400 ships, to demonstrate resolve. Torvald had been given command because he was the most experienced fleet commander in the Conquered service. He did not share their confidence. "Resk," he said, Show me the human fleet disposition as of the most recent scan. The display shifted. Human fleet icons appeared, blue, smaller than the green Vrashari markers, scattered across the border region in a pattern that the intelligence analysts described as defensive posture. 341 confirmed human warships in the adjacent sectors, Resk reported. 2 carrier groups, 6 battleship divisions, and approximately 180 patrol vessels of various classes. Disposition unchanged from the last update, which was, he checked, 11 days ago. 11 days. Torvald tasted the number. Our intelligence on human fleet positions is 11 days old. Standard update cycle, Commander. The deep range probes run on a... I know the cycle. Resk, in 11 days a human carrier group can cross 3 sectors. In 11 days, a human battleship division can reposition from the border to the interior and back again twice. In 11 days, the entire picture can change. The humans have given no indication. The humans have given no indication of anything. That is the indication. The bridge was quiet. The sensor officer's console continued its rhythmic sweep, painting the same pristine picture. 1,400 Vrashari icons, 9 billion cubic kilometers of emptiness, all nominal, all clear, nothing to see. Torvald reached his decision the way he reached all decisions, not with a sudden insight, but with the slow, grinding recognition that the evidence, read properly, pointed in only one direction. All ships Condition 2, raise defensive screens, weapons to standby power, sensor platforms to maximum sensitivity, and I want the deep-range probes launched on accelerated cycle. 3-hour intervals, not 11-day. If anything moves in the adjacent sectors, I want to know about it before it knows about itself. Sen relayed the orders. Across 1,400 ships, the alert status climbed 1 notch, not to full combat readiness, which would have frightened the War Council and drawn questions that Torvald did not want to answer yet, but to the preparatory state that put crews at their stations and weapons within reach. It was not enough. Torvald knew it was not enough, but it was what he could do without triggering a political crisis, and he was, above all things, a professional. The first deep-range probe returned 47 minutes later. Its data was unremarkable: background radiation, cosmic dust, the distant thermal signature of a star going through its red giant phase. Nothing that should not be there. The second probe returned 3 hours after the first. Same result, nothing. The third probe did not return. Dallon reported it at the 4-hour mark. Commander, Probe 3 has missed its return window. Last telemetry places it at bearing 214, range 12 million kilometers, heading into the Rathan Strait. Torvald felt the stillness settle into his bones, the deep, cold clarity that came before combat, when the body understood what the mind had been arguing about for hours. What was its last reading before telemetry ceased? Dallon scrolled through the data. Standard background, cosmic radiation, dust density consistent with the strait's profile. No contacts, no anomalies. He paused. Wait, there is one irregularity. The probe's gravitational sensor logged a microvariance in the local gravity field. A fluctuation of 0.003%, approximately 2 seconds before telemetry ceased. 0.003%. Torvald turned to Resk. What would cause a gravitational microvariance of that magnitude? Resk's prosthetic hand stopped clicking. His primary eyes met Torvald's, and in them Torvald saw the expression of a man who had just found the thing he'd been looking for and wished he hadn't. A ship, Resk said. A very large ship, running at minimal power, with its mass displaced across a distributed gravitational dampening field. The kind of field that would make a vessel effectively invisible to conventional sensors. No thermal signature, no electromagnetic emissions, no active systems of any kind. The variance is what leaks through. It is the only thing that leaks through. And the probe? Destroyed, most likely. A passive intercept, the ship would not have needed to fire a weapon. At that range, with the probe approaching blind, a simple gravitational pulse would have been sufficient to crush it. The bridge was very quiet now. 17 officers at 17 stations, all of them listening, all of them understanding what the data meant even if none of them wanted to say it aloud. Torvald said it. There is a human warship in the Rathan Strait, at least one. It is running silent, using a gravitational dampening system that our sensors cannot detect, and it has been there long enough to intercept a probe that entered the strait at the standard approach vector. He paused, which means it knows our probe schedules, which means it has been watching us long enough to learn them. Commander, Sen said, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of a man choosing each word as precisely as a surgeon choosing an incision. If there is a human warship in the strait, it would have had to pass through our sensor net to get there. Nothing passed through. We would have detected. We would have detected what we were looking for. We were looking for thermal signatures, electromagnetic emissions, and active sensor pings. We were looking for what every warship in every fleet in the cataloged sectors broadcasts when it moves through space. We were not looking for a gravitational microvariance of 0.003%, because no species in the cataloged sectors has ever fielded a ship that could reduce its signature to that level. Sen absorbed this, the holding back principle. Yes, for 37 years we have cataloged what the humans chose to show us. We built a file of 4,000 entries, and every entry described a capability that the humans allowed us to observe. And in all that time, we never once considered the possibility that they were showing us the ordinary while keeping the extraordinary out of sight, that they were being polite. He turned back to the display. The 1400 green icon stared at him, and somewhere in the Rathan Strait, in the dark channel between two nebulae where 11 crew members had died, something sat in silence and watched. All ships, Condition 1, full combat readiness. I want every sensor on this fleet pointed at the Rathan Strait. If a dust particle moves in that channel, I want it identified, classified, and tracked. Commander, Sen said, if you raise to Condition 1, the War Council will receive the alert notification within 6 minutes. They will demand an explanation. You will need to tell them that you have raised the entire 3rd Expeditionary Fleet to full combat readiness based on gravitational microfluctuations and one missing probe. I am aware of what I will need to tell them. And while they are debating it, the thing in the Rathan Strait will continue to sit where 11 people died. I would rather explain to the War Council why I raised the alert than explain why I did not. The fleet surged to full alert. Across 1,400 warships, crews scrambled to battle stations, weapons charged to full power, shields expanded to combat configuration. The tactical display erupted in a web of overlapping sensor cones as every ship in the formation turned its electronic eyes toward the narrow black gap between the nebulae. For 19 minutes they found nothing. At the 7-minute mark, Torvald ordered a destroyer pack, 6 ships, commanded by a veteran captain named Drush, to advance toward the strait's entrance and deploy a line of active sensor buoys. 24 autonomous platforms that could detect the heat from a warm cup at 2 million kilometers. Drush deployed them in a grid pattern that covered the strait's mouth like a net. 24 buoys, all of them broadcasting, all of them reporting nothing. Dallon's fingers tapped his console in a nervous rhythm. Commander, the acoustic sensor net in the strait is registering a very faint pressure differential in the interstellar medium. Like something displaced a volume of gas, and the gap hasn't filled back in yet. Where? Bearing 193, deep in the strait, roughly 8 million kilometers from the entrance, approximately 90 hours old. 90 hours. Whatever had moved through that section of the strait had done so before Torvald had raised the alert. The only trace it had left was a gap in the gas that was already closing behind it like water filling a footprint. "It's been repositioning," Torvald said, "moving through the strait in slow increments, keeping its gravitational footprint below our detection threshold. It has been doing this for weeks." Torvald opened the tactical log and scrolled through 14 weeks of entries. He found 4 gravitational microfluctuations, 9 weeks ago at bearing 208, 7 weeks at 211, 5 weeks at 199, 3 weeks at 194, each flagged as a natural tidal effect and dismissed. When he plotted the bearings, they described a line, a slow, curved approach tracking inward at approximately 1 million kilometers per week. "It's been inside the strait for at least 9 weeks, Resk said, studying the plot, "moving slowly, deliberately, and every time our sensors picked up its footprint, the duty officer logged it as a tidal artifact, because the training manual does not account for a ship that can reduce its signature to the level of background noise." Torvald stared at the 4 points. 9 weeks of a human warship creeping through his sensor perimeter, learning the rhythm of his fleet the way a surgeon learns the rhythm of a heartbeat before cutting. The War Council had called the 7 months of human silence a victory. Torvald understood now what the silence had actually been. Then Dallon's voice cracked the silence, not with alarm, with bewilderment. "Commander, gravitational variance at bearing 197, range 4 million kilometers, magnitude 0.014%. He rechecked the reading. "And it's increasing, 0.021, 0.03, 0.05, 0.08. The variance is climbing exponentially, 0.12, 0.19. "It's powering up," Resk said. "It's not powering up," Torvald said. The clarity was absolute now, cold and total. "It's letting us see it." The display lit. Where there had been nothing, 9 billion cubic kilometers of pristine, nominal nothing, there was suddenly a contact, a single contact, but the readings were wrong, not in the sense of error, in the sense of category. The numbers did not fit any class of warship in any database. "Mass estimate," Dallon said, his voice gone flat, 18 million metric tons. The bridge went silent. The eternal mandate, the ship they were standing on, massed 2.4 million metric tons. 18 million was 7.5 times that. 18 million metric tons was not a warship. It was a mobile fortress. It was a city designed to kill. "That mass class does not exist in any human naval documentation we have ever obtained," Resk said. His prosthetic hand had stopped moving entirely. "No hull, no class designation, no shipyard record, no intelligence report references a human warship of 18 million metric tons. Because while we were cataloging their cruisers and building our file of 4,000 entries," Torvald said, "they were building this. Somewhere we weren't looking, in a shipyard we didn't know existed." The contact moved out of the Rathan Strait, shedding its gravitational cloak the way a predator sheds patience, deliberately, with the slow confidence of something that no longer needs to hide. "Thermal output off the chart," Dallon reported. "Electromagnetic emissions across all bands. Hull reflectivity profile no match found. Engine signature, there are no engine plumes. No visible exhaust. It's accelerating without any detectable propulsion." "Gravitational manipulation," Resk said. "It warps the space in front of it and falls forward. No exhaust port, no geometric weakness." The Vrasheri had built their entire tactical doctrine around targeting exhaust port gaps. The Ninth Dawn had no such gap. It was shielded on every axis because it did not need to vent anything. 342 weapon hardpoints, Dallon continued. Active, all of them. The energy output from the weapons array alone exceeds the total power generation of this dreadnought by a factor of 4. 342. The Eternal Mandate carried 36. The mathematics were not complex. They were simply final. 3.8 million kilometers and closing, Dallin said. Unhurried. It has known where we are for 116 days. Weapons officer, Torvald said, if we engaged at this range. Kalon, 9 years at the weapons station, studied her console. The gravitational field is distorting our targeting solutions. Hit probability less than 8%. If we closed to point-blank range, we'd spend 6 minutes inside its weapon envelope. 342 hardpoints, unobstructed firing solutions. The 7 months of silence had not been fear. They had been patience. 116 days in the dark, learning everything about the fleet that had done the killing. The 9th Dawn had been a guest in Torvald's home for nearly 4 months. On the destroyer screen, Drush's ships were pulling back on instinct. The involuntary recoil of small vessels, in the presence of something that made their weapons irrelevant and their armor cosmetic. Incoming transmission, human frequency, standard diplomatic channel. Put it through. The voice that filled the bridge was flat, unhurried, and carried no emotion. Female measured, with the cadence of someone reading prepared text that she had written herself, and did not need to embellish because the words were sufficient. Vrashari 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. This is Captain Adiz Okonkwo of the Terran Ascendancy warship 9th Dawn. I am transmitting on all frequencies to ensure this message reaches every ship in your formation. 7 months ago, a Vrashari strike force entered the Rathan Strait and destroyed a Terran signals intelligence post designated Station Argus. 11 crew members, 6 naval personnel and 5 civilian analysts were killed in the attack. Their names are as follows. She read the names, all 11. First name, family name, rank or position, years of service. It took her 43 seconds. She did not rush. She gave each name the same weight, the same precise articulation, as if carving each one into stone. Torvald listened to all 11. He did not know any of them. He had signed the operational order. He had reviewed the after-action report that listed 11 casualties in a single line, enemy personnel, 11 KIA, 0 WIA, 0 POW, and moved on. 11 had been a data point, an acceptable figure in the strategic calculus of border enforcement. Now a human voice was reading those 11 data points back to him, one at a time, and each one had a name and a number of years served, and each one filled the bridge with the flat, precise cadence of a species that calibrated its responses to the gram. These people had existed and had been killed, and the ship in the void was the answer. The Terran Ascendancy considers the destruction of Station Argus and the killing of its crew to be an act of war. Our diplomatic response through conquered channels was the first step in a measured process of accountability. This vessel is the second. The 9th Dawn has been in the Rathan Strait for 116 days. During that time, it has mapped your fleet disposition, cataloged your sensor capabilities, documented your patrol schedules, and identified every weakness in your formation's defensive architecture. This information has been transmitted to Terran Combined Fleet Command. I am not here to engage your fleet. I am here to demonstrate what we chose not to show you for 37 years. The 9th Dawn is one ship. It is the first of its class. There are 11 more under construction in shipyards you have not yet located, and when they are complete, the Terran Ascendancy will possess a force projection capability that your intelligence service cannot currently model, because every variable in your models is based on capabilities we allowed you to observe. You have been measuring our restraint and calling it our limit. That assessment is incorrect. I am now going to conduct a weapons demonstration. No Vrashari vessel will be targeted. No crew member will be harmed. You are invited to observe. The transmission ended. Commander Sen said, orders. Hold position. All ships hold position. Weapons to defensive posture only. No ship fires without my direct order. Any captain who discharges a weapon without authorization will answer to me personally. The Ninth Dawn took up a position 4 million kilometers from the nearest element of the Vrashari Formation, a destroyer screen of 18 ships that held their stations with the nervous rigidity of small animals in the presence of something very large. Weapons demonstration commencing. The human ship is targeting. The comm officer paused. Commander, it is targeting the remnants of Station Argus. The Ninth Dawn fired. Captain Drush's voice came through on the fleet command channel, stripped of protocol. Commander, the target ship has rotated 30 degrees on its vertical axis. Energy build in the forward hull, concentrated, directional. The gravitational field is contracting. Pulling inward, focusing, like a lens. All ships hold position. No one fires, no one moves. What Dallon's instruments recorded was a gravitational pulse, a focused distortion of spacetime itself, compressed into a cone 200 meters wide at emission and 4,000 meters at impact, traveling at a velocity the sensors could not accurately measure because the pulse arrived at the target before the light from its emission reached the fleet's optical sensors. Faster than light. The wreckage of Station Argus, every fragment, every shard, every frozen molecule of atmosphere, and every piece of the 11 human beings whose remains had drifted in the cold for 7 months, was compressed to a point, not scattered, not vaporized, compressed. The gravitational pulse gathered the entire debris field into a sphere approximately 14 meters across, glowing with the dull red heat of matter, forced into density that the periodic table had not been designed to describe. Then the glow faded. The sphere cooled. A memorial and a warning and a demonstration, all compressed into 14 meters of something that would drift in the Rathan Strait for 1,000,000 years. The bridge was silent. Dallon's hands had left his console. They were trembling. Across the fleet, the internal communication net erupted queries, status reports, confused requests for confirmation. Torvan ordered the raw sensor data transmitted to every ship with his authentication stamp. I prefer a frightened fleet that understands the situation to a confident fleet that does not. That weapon, Resk said, uses focused gravitational manipulation to compress matter at a distance, faster than light delivery, effective range unknown. We have no countermeasure. Could it do that to a ship? Sen asked. A dreadnought is approximately 700,000 cubic meters. The energy scaling is, Resk ran the numbers, well within possible. If it can compress a dreadnought, Kalon said, then it can compress a cruiser, or a destroyer, or a corvette. There is no lower limit. The communications console chimed again. Vrashari 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. This is Captain Okonkwo. Your sensor records now contain data on a weapons system that your intelligence service has not previously documented. I will remain in the Rathan Strait for the next 48 hours. During that time, the Terran Ascendancy invites the Vrashari conquered to open direct negotiations regarding the Aranth Corridor, the Rathan Strait, and the status of the 11 personnel killed at Station Argus. The terms: formal acknowledgement of unprovoked aggression, reparations to the families of the 11 killed, and the permanent withdrawal of Vrashari military assets from the Rathan Strait. These are not demands. They are the minimum conditions under which the Terran Ascendancy will continue to exercise the restraint that your War Council has mistaken for weakness. If the conquered chooses not to negotiate, the Ninth Dawn will depart in 48 hours, and the next communication from the Terran Ascendancy will not come through diplomatic channels. It will come through 11 more vessels identical to this one. Okonkwo out. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing Torvan had ever felt on a bridge. She had not been threatening. She had been informing. The way a physician informs a patient of a terminal diagnosis, with the clinical precision of someone who has determined that the facts, laid out clearly, are sufficient. 11 more. 12 ships total, each 118 million metric tons. She had shared the number because the number was the message. We built 12 of these because of 11 people, and you will never find the shipyards, and by the time you understand what you are facing, the construction will be complete. The display showed 1,400 green icons arrayed in their crescent, and one blue icon, motionless, sitting in the throat of the Rathan strait like a stone in a windpipe. Commander, the War Council will want to be informed. The War Council will want to send a strike force, Torvald said. They will argue 1,400 to 1. They will argue strength demands strength. And you? Torvald looked at the single blue icon. The arithmetic said 1,400 to 1. The reality said that 1,400 ships firing on a target they could not hit, which could compress any one of them into a 14-meter sphere before their weapons cycled, was not a battle. It was a lottery. The fury in the human act was not hot. It was the fury of absolute capability held in absolute control, a species that could have compressed every ship in his fleet, and instead compressed the wreckage of its own dead into a memorial. They did not want to destroy the Vrashari fleet. They wanted the Vrashari fleet to understand what it could not destroy. They read 11 names, Torvald said, on an open frequency, one at a time. They wanted us to understand that the weapon and the ship and the demonstration were an answer to 11 specific people, and the answer was calibrated, not to the maximum of what they could do, but to the minimum of what they felt was owed. He turned from the display. Every face on the bridge carried the same expression, recognition that the humans were measured, restrained, manageable, and also, when the restraint was set aside, something that the conquered 600 years of expansion had not prepared them to face. Behind him, Kalon was running projections, feeding the compression data into her targeting computer. The computer returned its answer in 4 seconds. She read it, deleted it, ran it again, and sat very still. What did the computer say? The gravitational field would deflect our particle lances by 17 to 23 degrees. Miss distance of 400 meters. Massed fire from all 6 dreadnoughts improves deflection by 2 degrees. We still miss. Torpedoes would be captured by the field and redirected. Into us, potentially. The silence after that was the silence of professionals realizing that every tool they possessed was useless, and that the only thing between them and annihilation was the decision of the human captain not to fire. Open a channel to Conquered Command, Priority Alpha, Encryption Level 7. Channel open. Conquered Command, this is Fleet Commander Torvald Dreth. I am reporting a first contact event with a previously unknown human warship class massing approximately 18 million metric tons, armed with a gravitational compression weapon of faster-than-light delivery and unknown effective range. The vessel conducted a weapons demonstration on the wreckage of Station Argus without firing on any conquered vessel. It has transmitted terms for negotiation. Full sensor data and communications are attached. My formal recommendation, accept the terms, all of them, immediately. We destroyed a listening post and killed 11 people. They responded by placing one ship in the void where those people died, and that ship carries a weapon that can compress our flagship to the size of a ground vehicle. They are not bluffing. They chose to demonstrate, not to destroy. That choice is the only reason this fleet still exists. It will not be offered twice. If the War Council responds with anything other than full acceptance, I will request an immediate audience to explain in person what I am transmitting to them now. He paused. One more thing, Command. The human captain read 11 names. Every name. Those 11 people are the reason that ship is here, not politics, not territory. A species that considered 11 deaths worth answering with the most advanced warship it has ever built. We need to understand what that means, not strategically, what it means about who we provoked. Dreth out. He cut the channel. The bridge was silent. The tactical display painted its picture: 1,400 green icons, one blue icon, the dark channel of the Rathan Strait stretching between them like a scar. The Ninth Dawn sat motionless, its 342 weapon hardpoints still active, its presence filling the void with a signature every sensor in the fleet could read with absolute clarity. It was not hiding anymore. It had spent 116 days in the dark, learning everything it needed to learn, and now it sat in the light and waited. Torvald thought about the file: 4,000 entries, 37 years of intelligence gathering, every line describing a capability the humans had permitted to be observed. He thought about the word inconclusive and understood now that it had never been an admission of insufficient data. It was a warning. The humans had been holding back for 37 years, and the distance between what the Vrashari had measured and what the Ninth Dawn represented was the distance between courtesy and fury, calibrated to the names of 11 dead, was not a thing that 1,400 warships could answer. Torvald remained on the bridge for 7 hours. He did not sit. He stood at the apex of his amphitheater of blue-white stations and watched the display. At the 3rd hour, Resk brought him the science team's analysis of the gravitational compression weapon. 11 pages, 47 equations the physics team could not solve because the underlying principles were not in Vrashari theoretical physics. The summary: we cannot determine maximum yield, effective range, recharge cycle, or targeting constraints. Recommendation: do not provoke a second demonstration. At the 5th hour, the War Council convened an emergency session. Important people gathering in an important room to discuss whether the universe had changed or whether they could vote it back to the way it had been. At the 6th hour, the Ninth Dawn launched a small marker buoy to the center of the compressed sphere. It broadcast on a frequency the Vrashari could receive but not decode, structured, clearly intentional, the encryption beyond anything in the Concord's cryptographic library. A marker, Resk said. They are marking the site, the way a species marks a grave. Torvald watched the small icon broadcasting its undecipherable signal into the void. He wondered if it was saying names. At the 7th hour, the War Council's response arrived. 3 sentences. It acknowledged receipt of his report. It classified the sensor data at the highest level of Concord security, and it instructed him to maintain position and await further orders. It did not address his recommendation. Torvald read the 3 sentences twice. Then he set the datapad on the edge of the tactical display and looked at his executive officer, who had remained on the bridge for the same 7 hours. They will argue about this for days, Torvald said. Subcommittees, additional analysis. They will debate whether the Ninth Dawn constitutes an act of war or an act of coercion while one ship sits in the strait and waits, and the answer is simple, and the answer is the only one that leads to this fleet existing 49 hours from now. What will you do? Sen asked. I will wait, Torvald said, as they are waiting. But I will wait with my eyes open and my fleet at condition 1, because the humans have been patient for 7 months and 116 days, and I do not intend to test what comes after patience runs out. The eternal mandate hummed beneath his feet. His fleet held its formation. The stars burned in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the empires that claimed the spaces between them. 1 ship, 342 weapons, 11 names. And the quiet, absolute patience of a species that had been polite for 37 years and had just finished being polite.